So we'll talk on some of this stuff we've talked about. So, I will move through it a little bit faster, but if you're on SSDI, and again, that is if you are straight on SSDI or if you're on CDB, so you're effectively on SSDI, then you do have to report earnings. So again, they don't care about resources. You could have millions of dollars in the bank. I always use an example of NBA players, right? NBA players are paying taxes into the system. They become disabled. They could still collect SSDI, even though they've got lots of money out there. So, but they do care about income. If you have, and they care about earned income, because the whole point of SSDI, right, is you're saying I have this disability, but this disability is so severe that it prevents me from working. And so what they say is this is where that substantial gainful activity comes into play. So this is a term that is specific to Social Security. It does not come into the rules for Medicaid. Medicaid has their own income rules. This is an income rule that is specific to Social Security and SSDI, which says in 2025, and this number does change every January, if you make $1,620 per month working and it's income that Social Security counts, then and you're not blind, then you have the ability to engage in SGA and therefore are not eligible for this program. And so it is possible for people who are on SSDI to work a little bit. And if their wages stay below the SGA limit for that year in each month, then they remain eligible for SSDI and they can keep both their wages and the monthly SSDI payment. But the moment you hit that SGA limit for the month, it'll kick you off. This is another reason why a lot of people get overpayment notices. Um, if you are blind, the SGA limit is higher right now. It's $2,700 per month, and you'll see kind of across the board for all of these programs that have income limits. If your disability is vision related, then you will typically have higher income cutoffs. Um, so um, and again, remember there are some types of income that Social Security doesn't count as income for these purposes. So just keep that in mind. If your income comes from self-employment, then the cost of running your business is deducted from your monthly earnings. And so only the net income. So if I run an online store, for example, and the cost of doing that with between fees I pay to the hosting site and shipping costs and all this stuff is, so my sales are $1,000 a month, but I spend $500 a month on all of those various fees. They're only counting the $500 a month net that you came from, but it's on the person making the money to show those calculations. Typically, the way that Social Security is finding out where there's two ways. One is you could have the app and you could be reporting your income every month, which is a good way to stay on top of it and make sure you don't have overpayments. Or they are going to be looking through running your Social Security number through the IRS database. And if they get an income hit, they're going to see here's this income that we didn't know about before, and they're going to ask you about it. And so you're going to have to be prepared to explain things to them. Um, Often on those, what the IRS is going to see is an annual income amount, right? I have a W-2 that says I made $20,000 last year. So it might be the case that in 2 months you were above SGA, but for the rest of the month you weren't. And so, but you have to be the one to show Social Security that is the case. Um, If there are costs associated to employing the person, it's possible to deduct that. That is a very specific rule. So one that I think if you're getting into that, you should hire a Social Security attorney to help you with it. I think that even to me that's not something I deal with on a regular basis, and every time I look at it, just feels very confusing to me. So, but it is possible to do. Um, like I said, every January that changes. So there is a trial work period for people who want to try working. Now I'm gonna make a note here for the CDB thing. Remember I said, if you have a work record, you can't be eligible for it. So this only occurs if you are already on the benefit, not prior to receiving the benefit. But if you are on the benefit and you wanted to try working, then you can get these trial work periods, which says we'll give you 9 months to try working, where maybe you are exceeding stuff, but you won't lose your benefits right away because this is a trial period. We're going to see if it will last long term. And then if it doesn't, no harm, no foul, your benefits stay in place. You don't have to reapply or do anything like that. But if you do it for 10 months and then stop, then you've got to go reapply and start over. Yeah, so the work performed during that trial period is not evidence that your disability has ceased, right? Because otherwise, if you've gone beyond the trial work period and you're still working, you're earning above SGA, that's what that says to Social Security. My disability is either stopped or it's improved to the point where I can be self-supporting and I no longer need this benefit. You only get one trial work period for each period of disability, which means that if you never have to reapply or start over, then you only get the one trial work period. If you worked for 12 months and so your benefit stopped because you exceeded the trial work period and they said, well, you're self-supporting, you're fine, and you had to reapply, and then you tried to go back to work again, you'd get another trial work period. Certain people cannot get this. So if you're 55 or older, you don't get a trial work period. It's just one of the weird age rules that they've put in place, in the same way they say if you're 65 or older, you're already technically disabled simply by virtue of your age. And then if you're enrolled in a vocational rehab program, but your disability has ceased, then it would go. This one I touched on a little earlier, the full retirement age. So you can see what age you have to be in order to collect your retirement benefit for Social Security. So for a lot of people these days, it's 67. So I want to touch just a little bit on the Pickle Amendment. This is not something that I see being that much of an issue anymore. But the problem people were encountering is they needed to maintain their Medicaid benefit. And this is really, I'll also make a note that for the most part, this is happens in states where your Medicaid eligibility is tied to your SSI status or your Social Security status, which is not the case in Missouri. But in those states, if you were approved for SSI and Social Security coordinated with your state agency to say, hey, they're now eligible for Medicaid, and so your Medicaid benefits have started. If something happens where you were on SSI, you're receiving your money, you switched at some point to receive some other version of Social Security, and that has cost of living increases every year, right? So if we're on retirement benefits for Social Security, we know every January we get a cost of living increase for people. And the cost of living increases put you over the income cap for Medicaid, then you can maintain your Medicaid eligibility via this Pickle Amendment. And so there's a process, and I've on the materials that you'll get, there's some slides that walk you through this process that talk about what Social Security is supposed to ask you. There's a formula they have to use to show how to calculate what they're going to treat your income as underneath this. But this is a way, because for a lot of people, Medicaid is the benefit that people most want to protect, because Medicaid is the thing that is paying for housing and transportation or long-term care or waivers and those types of things. And losing Medicaid would be a huge blow to the person with the disability. So we want to maintain Medicaid eligibility at all costs. And we don't want this excess income to be the thing that makes us lose all of that. And so this is a way then to deal with that if you were previously on SSI. It's possible to receive both SSI and SSDI at the same time. when that happens, it's because the SSDI amount is below whatever the SSI monthly benefit is. So if your SSDI is below 967 this year, they will supplement that with a little bit of SSI. So you might get $500 SSDI and 467 SSI. But that SSDI is going to get cost of living increases. And so if that messes up your Medicaid, and it might not, but if it did, you would have coverage under this pickle amendment. You can do this and it covers dual eligible individuals. So those people who are on Medicare and Medicaid, because if you're on SSDI and you get Medicare after you've waited the waiting period, then you could keep Medicare and Medicaid and receive these benefits. So like I said, in the slides, I've done what I'm calling Exhibit A. There are several slides that talk to you about how that pickle amendment income is calculated, what questions Social Security is asking, and things like that. I don't want to go too much into that because it is very complicated. And like I said, I'm not seeing this need to be used that often. So it's very case specific and fact specific. But I do want to make a note because I do think sometimes people get very worried that the increased income from Social Security is going to kick them off the Medicaid, and they don't want that. And so they're like, I almost don't want to apply for any of these Social Security benefits at all because I'm so worried that we're going to risk losing Medicaid. And so that's part of the reason why I bring some of these things up, because I just want you to know that there are ways that we can get around that so we maintain the Medicaid eligibility. Questions, things. I know we already talked about some of these things, but
If both parents are retired, how are they determining which parent's benefit amount that the 50% is calculated from?
yeah, so if both parents are retired, technically you can choose, and generally we're going to choose whoever has the higher monthly benefit. So
And then when should we start doing the application process for this? This person's child currently is 17. Would you
yeah, so
recommend?
you have to wait till 18 because of those parental deeming rules. So you can't do it before then. So age 18 is kind of the magic number for a lot of these programs, really, because that's when they become their own household. Medicaid and Social Security are always looking at who's in the household, so we know what the rules are that apply to them. And when your child turns 18, that means only their income and their assets will apply for all of these benefits programs. And so you can't do it before then unless your parental deeming rules aren't going to mess up eligibility. And otherwise, anytime after 18 is fine. And like I said, some people will come in and tell me I don't really care about SSI, and I know there's all sorts of rules that are associated with it, and so I don't really want to apply for that. I'm just going to apply for Medicaid. That's fine. You don't have to apply for both. And because we have that separate process here in Missouri, you just submit your Medicaid application separately. But like I said, I've mentioned earlier, I often recommend that we go ahead and submit the SSI application, even if that the monthly benefit payout is going to be very low, just because it establishes that age of disability onset and helps out later. The other thing I think that helps with kind of unrelated to Social Security programs is if you want to set up an ABLE account. ABLE accounts require that the person has a disability. So now you've got this thing that says, yes, this person has a disability. And same thing for special needs trust. If we're setting up and funding special needs trust, those laws say the beneficiary of a special needs trust has to meet the definition of disability according to the Social Security Administration. And if you've already got a letter from Social Security that says you do, then that makes that so much easier to know. And we're not having to guess and
Mhm.
hope that we meet the requirements.
So you mentioned those would be good documentation pieces for getting that. What are other things that they might request of us, other kinds of documentation they might want to see?
For Social Security.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say, especially if you're applying at 18 or close to 18. So if you've got an IEP or a 504 plan, those are going to be really helpful because those are going to have the the disability listed. It's going to have all those goals set out, which is proof of how the disability manifests in your child. Um, if you've got any neuropsychological testing or something similar that is recently done, then I would have that handy and ready to submit to them as well. If you've got that testing and it's old, I would say maybe more than 5 years old, you might consider getting an updated test done. Because when you are applying for Social Security as an adult, the standards are different than they are for children. And so, what some Social Security caseworkers have said is, well, you've got this old testing done, so maybe they met the standards, or this test shows that they met the standards as a child, but it doesn't necessarily show that they meet the standard as an adult just because of the age difference. And so you might consider going ahead and getting new testing done so that you have that handy to submit to them. But really, anything you have that has evidence of the disability and how it affects the person's ability to um, be self-supporting are things you want to keep on hand. Um, and of course, medical stuff is great, but anything you might have from other sources is also going to be good for that.
Somebody had asked about benefits if they would be canceled or paused if there was an issue with a felony and if that could affect benefits for your loved ones later on.
Yeah, they can be. So if you know what often happens in those cases is unless you're reporting that to Social Security, they don't necessarily know about it. But when they find out about it, they're going to issue an overpayment notice from the time, the conviction went through until you stopped receiving payments, and you'll have to deal with that. So but yes, it does affect the monthly benefit, and the best course of action is just to notify Social Security so you can get ahead of it instead of dealing with the overpayment on the back end.
The recipient is receiving SSI benefits, but the CDB benefit is more. Should they apply for the higher benefits or would that eliminate benefits altogether?
If you're receiving SSI and the parent is applying for their retirement benefit, then you should say yes to the question of, do I have an adult disabled child, and let Social Security make the switch over to CDB. It does not cancel all the benefits. It converts the benefits from one pot of money to a different pot of money. And the second pot of money is usually more beneficial. So you want to make the conversion if you can, but yeah, but it won't stop benefits altogether. It just means you get a different kind of benefit.
And then a few people were questioning, when should we turn to an attorney? Would this be something that we do when we're getting denied or something different?
I think so what I have found is that a lot of people will feel comfortable doing that initial application on their own. Um, but statistics show us that a lot of people are denied on their initial application and have to appeal the decision. And so typically, um, you will see people bring in an attorney for the appeal. Um, and I think that you could do it both ways. There are some people who do these applications who I know prefer to be brought in on the initial application because that helps them set up the stage for, if we're denied and we have to appeal this, then I've already got the record showing all these things I wanted to show, and it makes my appeal easier. Um, and so they prefer that. But there are others who will say, well, I'm not going to get involved unless there's a denial. And what the reason why I typically see that being the case is because payment for this type of work to the attorneys is based on a contingency fee. And so Social Security says your attorney gets a percentage of whatever your back pay is. Right. So if I submit an application in October, and it takes until October of next year for me to get approved, which would not be uncommon, then I still start getting paid as of the date of my application, right? So now I've got a year's worth of back pay that comes to me. Your attorney is going to get a percentage of that if you have one representing you in the application. And so if the disability is kind of so clear cut that they don't think you're going to get denied and there maybe you'll even get approved fairly quickly, there's not going to be any enough back pay for them to take a fee from that, and so they will typically wait to get involved if there's an appeal. So but it does vary depending on which attorney you're working with, but I've been told by a few that they actually really prefer to get in as early as possible so that they can get the record set up the way that they want to.
I know that you mentioned this when we first began, but could you remind us what your role is with your agency again? What do you specialize in?
Yeah, so in this context, as a special needs planning attorney, I'm typically not the person who's going to be doing the initial application or even the appeal with you, because that's going to be somebody who only does Social Security disability work. So where I'm getting involved in this is on the planning side of things, right? So people will come to me and say, my child is turning 18 and we need to figure out all these different steps. And so we're going to talk through, okay, should we apply for SSI? Do we need to build up the documentation before we do that to make sure the medical records reflect everything better? Are we going to go for guardianship? Are we going to apply for Medicaid? So I'm kind of doing the planning side of that stuff. Or if somebody is already on benefits, then where I get involved is uh, if you have a special needs trust and Social Security is saying your trust is not accurate or it's defective in some way, and so you're now not eligible for benefits, then I'm getting involved there. I'm certainly getting involved in overpayment stuff related to special needs trust defects and that kind of stuff. We're, fixing the trust if we can and doing all of that. Um, and dealing with stuff on the Medicaid side of things. So because we have to do a separate Medicaid application in Missouri, walking people through that, dealing with issues that pop up as we're going, also dealing with Medicaid issues that pop up because people have changed benefits from, for example, SSI to CDB and that kind of thing. Yeah, I think the core takeaway from this is, kind of have your documents in order before you apply. Make sure you've got everything on hand. Better to be over prepared and have more than you need in this scenario than not to. And so take your time to gather all of that up and then just kind of be aware of these little pitfalls, right? These little things that are just quirks in the law that like aren't super well known, but can really trip people up as you're going through the process for things. If you've got a fairly straightforward, clearly meets the disability definition and assets and income are clearly within the realm of eligibility and no issues, then going on SSI, great. You follow the rules, you stay on SSI until and unless you switch to something else. And maybe you never do switch to something else, depending on the circumstances, and you're fine. But as you can see with some of the stuff we talked about, there are these little speed bumps that sometimes get in our way for this stuff. So, the point of today was just to kind of make you aware that they exist, to help you issue spot them as you're going through stuff. But in no way, I mean, these are very complicated things. So if you're feeling like, well, now I know these words, but I still don't really know what they all mean, don't feel bad. That's super normal because they're very, very complicated. When we put this stuff in front of judges, they're like, ugh, why do we have to deal with Medicaid and Social Security? We don't understand these rules, right? So even people who like have legal training are not excited about dealing with these types of things. So, and so bring in, even if not an attorney, like an advocate or somebody who understands these programs, bring them in if you need to. Don't feel like, you should be able to navigate this on your own, because it really is just very complicated.